All right, welcome to our event this afternoon. My name is Sean Ade, and I am a professor here at GW in the School of Media and Public Affairs. I'm also the director of the Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication, which is a joint effort of the School of Media and Public Affairs and the Elliott School of International Affairs, whose building we are in right now. It's really my pleasure and my honor to be hosting this event today. This is easily the most interesting of the many interesting events that we've done in the 4 years or so that I've been with the Institute. I think it's going to be a really innovative and intriguing way to talk about cultural diplomacy, particularly because it's March, cultural diplomacy programs that look to empower women and girls around the world. There has been what Anne-Marie Slaughter called yesterday a revolution in diplomacy in the current administration, particularly with Secretary Clinton, in focusing on people as much as the powerful and thinking of diplomacy as something not necessarily even separated between public diplomacy and diplomacy, but just diplomacy, something that is a concept being bandied about by some of the people in the room here. Without further ado, I would like to thank a couple of people very quickly. First of all, the deans of the Elliott School and the College of Arts and Sciences for their great support of the Institute and programs like this, and the Walter Roberts Endowment, which is helping fund this event and also a great supporter of the Institute, and Walter Roberts himself is a great patron of the Institute. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Frank Sesno, who is the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs. Frank, as you know, is a longtime CNN anchor and special correspondent, award-winning journalist, and a great boss. And I don't just say that because he writes my checks of sorts. Frank, thanks.
Well, thank you, Sean, and thank you to all of you who are here today. Let me just say that it is a great privilege to be the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs. For those of you who don't know, our undergraduate majors fall into two categories. One is journalism and mass communication. The other is political communication. So I like to say we are the media intersection where information goes from the governed to the governing, and from the elite to the rest of us. But also we try to put our arms around really understanding how we communicate, connect, govern, and organize. That's why what the Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication is all about is so important. As Sean mentioned to you, I spent my life as a foreign correspondent. I first came to Washington as an intern with the Voice of America. You've heard of the Voice of America? I ended up working for the Associated Press and standing on the tarmac in Wiesbaden as American hostages came back from Iran and reporting in real time and hearing that coming back over Armed Forces Radio, and ultimately ended up at CNN, which changed the way the world communicates. So this notion of public diplomacy and how we connect and how fast information moves and the impact it has is something that simply couldn't be more relevant and urgent and important in terms of how this country presents itself and how those who are practicing the craft present what is happening in the world. That's why what the Institute does and what the Institute is trying to foster and grow is so critically important in a world of Twitter and music and science and ideas. How that information conveys, how we connect with these very diverse audiences and stakeholders around the world will determine how those audiences and stakeholders behave, what they believe, what they know, how they respond. It is just such a great pleasure to introduce Tara Sonnenschein today. I've known Tara for a long time, since before she began her illustrious career as a diplomat and leader in all the capacities that she has recently forged, to her nefarious past as a journalist, which was a pretty good past, actually. She, as you probably know, if our political culture can do anything, will be the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. So she will put her considerable experience and stamp on the stories that the country tells about itself, and how we do this thing called public diplomacy. She's been aligned with the U.S. Institute of Peace with their leadership team for quite some time. She joined them in January 2009 as the executive vice president, and she oversees strategic planning and big ideas there, public outreach, publications, and that sort of thing. She has been at many international organizations, as you probably know, and affiliated with them, from the International Crisis Group to the Internews Networks, CARE, the American Academy of Diplomacy, and Women of Washington. She has an extensive network, and everyone I know anywhere in her network who talks about Tara Sonnenschein does it with both affection and immense respect because of what she does, who she is, and what she stands for. So I would like to invite her to reconnect with my great colleague, Professor Sean Ade, who is building something. Look at this. The room is overflowing. I cannot tell you how great this is. Guys, you can come down on the inside if you're going to stand. We've got room on the side and some more chairs over here if you're looking to sit down. So please come on in and make yourselves comfortable. Ladies and gentlemen, Tara Sonnenschein and Professor Sean Ade.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. And I can tell that this is actually working. You want to test yours?
Yes, testing 1, 2, 3. Thanking Frank Says No with all my heart. He read exactly what I gave him to read. Very, very, very grateful. There you go.
If only I had that power over Frank, then that would be great. Thank you very much for joining us. I was telling some people when we were milling about that this is really one of the more interesting programs we've tried to put on to talk about cultural diplomacy, and particularly for women and girls in a very different way. To get us started, I wanted to show some brief clips that I think 3 of them together sort of lay out what we're dealing with here. So Derek, if you could cue that up.
البشري اللي قدام العساكر وخلاني ما بين بيني وما بين العسكري اللي قدامي حوالي متر. انا مش هنسى المنظر العسكري ده ابدا في حياتي يعني. كان واقف مش بيبص لي، هو باصص كده وواضح ان هو بيتجنب ان هو يبص لي وعمال يعيط. في لحظه كده لقيته بيقول حاجه ما سمعتش بيقول ايه، وبعدين قال لي امشي. سمعته وهو بيقول امشي وانا كنت فضلت واقفه، وبعدين فجاه بقى ابتدوا يضربوا نار كلهم في نفس اللحظه.
In your role as a mother, most times you have 4 or 5 children, and they are not the same. They may come from the same stock, but they all have different tricks, different attributes. There are some who are, what should I say, who are disgusting. There are some who are lovely, some who like to fight. And you, the mother, is always a mediator. That is why we say women are born mediators.
There have been Peace Corps volunteers at Guiyang Medical College before, and the girl before me had the idea to start prom.
There will be a lot of people who don't know how to do the dances. So who can help them? We can help them.
We think about what are some popular American line dances or group dances. There are not a lot of outlets for hobbies or interests. And so this is an event that students are really excited about having and look forward to planning and creating.
We see women on the front lines of some of the more intense moments of the last year in the Arab Spring. Following the Arab Spring, we hear a lot about, the Facebook revolution and all that, but one of the things that we were talking about at lunch with some of the panelists was how after the Arab Spring, those same social media were also used by, among others, women and girls to continue to build that community and pressure their own movement to not lose sight of those goals. women as important parts of the mediation process, whether it's at the highest levels with people such as yourself or Anne Marie Slaughter, or it's in communities on an everyday basis. And then the importance of building these sorts of relationships through the types of programs we're talking about today. And one of the reasons why we're so excited to have you come join us is that between all of the things you've done, and particularly the work at USIP and what hopefully you'll be doing very soon, you seem to be in a sort of unique position to talk about that. I wonder if you could start us off by talking about, from your experience, why it's important to think about cultural diplomacy programs as they relate to women and girls.
Sure. Well, let me begin by thanking all of you for being here. It's a gorgeous day outside, so the fact that you're in here, we have to make it as interesting and fun as being outdoors, and it's why I wanted to do this conversational style. I think we're all getting a little tired of speeches. Anybody feel like they've heard too many speeches in their lives? And part of public diplomacy is conversation. So I hope today is a rich and robust conversation. Be thinking about your questions and comments early on, because I would like this to be very much a dialogue. Women and girls, cultural diplomacy, public diplomacy. I can't think of a more exciting intersection for everyone in this room who cares about unlocking the potential of half the world, or as Nick Kristof puts it, half the sky. Women and girls make up about 50% of the population. They are not represented, unfortunately, often in our economic, political, social, cultural, educational life of communities around the world. And simply put, that does not make sense. And as Secretary Clinton has said, and I love this, it doesn't make sense to leave women and girls out if you want peace or prosperity or both. You cannot have economic prosperity for any nation if half of their population is not unleashed with its economic power. You cannot have peace anywhere if you are not going to include women. So let me give you a couple of statistics that are current and just give you a sense of what I mean by underrepresented in our peace and prosperity. So around the world, we have peace processes. We make peace treaties, there are peace agreements, they end conflicts, and societies move on. So we looked at the last, let's say, decade of peace processes. And there were 24 peace formal processes since going back 10 years. And we looked at how many women were signatories to the peace agreements. And I'm going to read you some of these statistics. 2% were signatories. 3% in the peace processes were mediators. 8% the women were negotiators. 5% were witnesses to it. The exception, of course, being Liberia. How many of you are familiar with the story of women in Liberia? It's a great story, and there's a great film to see called Pray the Devil Back to Hell about it. The point of this is that you need to deal women in to peace processes. You need to have their economic power unleashed. And it is in everyone's interest that we make some progress on this front. It is not a women's issue. It is a human issue. It is not a ladies' issue. It is a gender-based issue. Men are equally interested, involved. They want to see this happen in many places. But this is absolutely something that is going to take off, and these numbers are going to change.
What types of challenges, though, do you see or have you seen over the last 20 years in the change in this question? The challenges for doing programs aimed at empowering women and girls, not only in cultures in which they are particularly disadvantaged or disempowered, but really across the spectrum. It's not like there are a lot of cultures in which women, have seats of power. I mean, we can look at our own U.S. Senate for that matter. So what kinds of unique challenges are you seeing with that, and how has that changed over time? How is it improving or not?
The challenges are very straightforward. They're cultural, so they're stereotypic in nature. They are often part of the traditional formal structures of the way societies are set up. They are economic in that in many of the countries where I've worked, women cannot get access to land, inheritance, opportunities to start businesses, invest, to be entrepreneurs, to be creative economic drivers. And so what public diplomacy actually can do is convene women and girls, put them together with the powerful entrepreneurs and men, make sure they have access to microcredit, make sure they are at the table, in the room, part of the mix. Make sure they are elected to parliaments. A few countries now are saying 1/3, 30% minimum, have to be in the parliament. And I would go further and say not only do these women need to be in the parliament, they need to be on the committees that control the economic purse strings of the country or the national security. This is a national security issue for us and everyone. I don't need to tell this audience, because you're all so interconnected, how interdependent we are. John Donne once said, no man, I think he meant and women, no man and woman is an island unto themselves. We are all part of the continent, part of the main. So we simply have no choice but to be involved in the rest of the world. The rest of the world has no choice but to be involved with us. So once we get over that interdependency and interconnectivity, we absolutely have no choice but to include not just women, but many marginalized groups. We absolutely need to go with an inclusionary model, a model of tolerance, a model of inclusion, a model that speaks to our fundamental belief in the power of an individual to change things. How many in this room feel that as an individual you can change something, anything? And it's a very interesting question, and when you go home tonight, ask somebody around your table whether they feel empowered to change things. Because this whole public diplomacy revolution, this whole conversation about women and girls, seeing the Chinese learn the Macarena, line dancing, this is about inclusion, and it's about inclusiveness. I do want to at some point tell you the backstory of the postcard from China, but we'll get to it.
Actually, I was going to ask you about that specifically, so go ahead.
So I asked that be included. Did anyone particularly like that little? It's wonderful. It was done by a woman named Maureen Orth, who was married to a man named Tim Russert. And many of you may remember Tim Russert, very wonderful news anchor man who died way too early. Maureen is a Peace Corps volunteer, and she decided that somehow we had ignored the Peace Corps volunteers who do so much in the stead of public diplomacy. So she went out and did a bunch of these postcards, and if you go Google postcards and Peace Corps, you will see many other countries. The China one is one I happen to like because of my fascination with Chinese public diplomacy, which somebody can ask about later. But Maureen did that video, and she's doing a lot more. And it just shows you when you put two cultures in the same room and you let them go, they all went to the prom, which was really very exciting.
Well, I wonder if you can talk about specific types of cultural diplomacy programs, maybe starting with this, and why they work, but also I'd be very interested in hearing, in your experience, what types of cultural diplomacy programs, or particularly for women and girls maybe, that are less effective or present more challenges. So when we look at this video of the line dancing, I could imagine a skeptical senator on appropriation saying, well, why are we giving money for line dancing in China?
Sure.
So, justify that.
A good question. Firstly, let me give you some examples of some of the things that have been done in the women and girls space over the last few years that have been very successful. One is Tech Women, where the State Department has actually encouraged women around the globe to get involved with one another technologically, to learn the skills, to go to tech camps, to be wired, to use, where they have them, cellular devices, and to connect with one another. And that has enabled many women to start to create businesses and to scale up businesses. Imagine what you can do if you suddenly can get access to prices worldwide and you're involved in marketing a product. It's just phenomenal what you can do if you have some technical skills. So that's been very, very successful. Culture, yes, absolutely wonderful, but it is not the only, and I know it is seen as soft power. I reject the notion that there's anything soft about that. I don't think we distinguish today as much between hard power and soft power. It's all smart power. That's smart power. But it doesn't need to be just cultural. Let me give you, if we go back in time to the first woman who was speaking about conflict, what happens in Afghanistan when women arrive at a checkpoint outside Kabul? Now take your mind, we're away from line dancing in China. We're in a war zone. We're in a conflict region. And women confront a member of the military. May not speak the language. Maybe he does. He may not know the culture. Maybe he does. He may not have dealt with many Afghan women. Maybe he has. The military came around to understand that they needed to relate to those Afghan women differently than they had been doing if they were going to stand a chance of creating any community engagement and dialogue that might make the killing field less dangerous. So they put together FETs, Female Engagement Teams. And when you go and you look up female engagement teams, you think, how come I really hadn't heard about these? These are women military deployed from NATO and European countries and the United States who can interact with women in Kandahar, in Kabul, they're in Pakistan, they're in Swat Valley, they are everywhere now. And they are finding that that kind of interaction so improves a volatile situation. And that, you know something, these women actually know what's happening in these tribal communities. They know where the conflict is going. And when it comes time to negotiate a peace process, if we get there with the Taliban, they need to be in the room. And they need to be at the table. And their girls need to be in school. So you can begin to see how this all comes around. What doesn't work? Lecturing, which is why in just a moment we're going to open this up. Talking at people doesn't seem to work very well. Not being face-to-face at times has its drawbacks. I love technology, 2.0, public diplomacy online, absolutely a place for it, but it should not substitute for being at the same table, in the same room, in a classroom, on a campus, in a Fulbright program, in an exchange program, at a high school, learning English, whatever it is that is a cultural engagement, positive experience, face-to-face, together, we should do. I could have done this online today and spoken to you by Skype or video, but I wouldn't feel the same connection.
Right.
So on that, I hope we can invite
Absolutely.
some of your thoughts.
Anybody have a question for Tara?
And there are no shy people at this institution. Frank told me nobody here is shy.
Well, PJ, he's a bashful, shy guy.
Talking to an Egyptian parliamentarian recently, I was talking to an Egyptian parliamentarian recently, and she actually made the counterintuitive point that percentages of women in parliaments actually retard their political development potentially in the short term. What and or if we're interested in percentages, why don't we put a particular percentage on the United States Senate as a good example?
Leave it to PJ Crowley to ask a tough question, because he always got tough questions thrown at him and dealt with them.
They're easier to ask than answer.
Well, there is a school of thought that having any quota in Parliament or elsewhere can be a negative. Sometimes people like to point to Rwanda or other cases where women got into the Parliament and didn't do the quote-unquote right thing. I'll take my chances that having them there is better than not. I think it's for women to decide once they're in the Parliament which way they want to vote. And I think the more opinions and life experiences you bring into a parliamentary body, the more reflective it ultimately will be of the people's will. So I'm one who says I'll throw the dice and go with putting more in than less.
Max.
Hi there, Max Entman. I'm a student here in the Global Communication program. I want to get your thoughts on exchange programs, specifically with countries that the United States doesn't necessarily have a strong diplomatic relationship, and potentially countries where there's some hostility. Is there a place for that kind of cultural diplomacy even when relations are not so good?
It's a great question. Can I ask Max what you study here?
I study, global communication, and I also work here at the Elliott School on videography and things like that. Social media.
I actually am a proponent of educational exchanges, not only in closed societies, in particular with closed societies. We do have the virtual luxury of some virtual exchanges. The State Department has an amazing Iran embassy online. We don't have a diplomatic presence in Iran, but we do, virtually. It's not as good. We have to deal with the Swiss when we're in country, but you can go on and actually reach people. The problem is the circumvention that the government attempts to do. I believe in exchange programs with Syria. We did them with Libya before Gaddafi fell. We had Libyan kids come to a NASA space camp, even when Libya was a closed society. So I have a sense that particularly when you talk to Fulbright exchange students years later who become prime ministers in their countries, and you talk to people overseas who've been through an American exchange program, they always say, life-changing, changed my perception of your cornfields. Many were in rural schools. An appreciation, a deep appreciation for our humanity, our culture, our diversity, our inclusiveness. So it's a resource question, because to engage in long-term one-year programs, they're expensive, and we're in a resource-constrained environment. So it's nice to say we should do this everywhere, but I think we should do it everywhere. China, the president has said that we're going to have a 100,000 strong initiative in China, and in Brazil, getting 100,000 Americans to study in China. Not so easy. The Chinese are not as welcoming to big numbers on the press side in particular as the US, so that can often be tense, but it's something worth working towards. I don't find many people who leave who say it wasn't a good experience. There are exceptions, there are bad stories, there are always things that go wrong, but for the most part, I think these exchanges work pretty well.
Well, and it's true for other types of cultural diplomacy programs. I mean, One of the great hallmarks of public diplomacy was the American Exhibition Program with the Soviet Union throughout the Cold War. It's not like we stopped doing things with them just because they were an existential threat. So,
Absolutely.
anybody else? Frank.
So I'm interested in what you said earlier about the power of the individual. And that's a very American perspective. And it's not a perspective that many other countries or even cultures share. And when they look at the way they welcome women and the role they carve out for women, they may see the American power of the individual, and this sermon that is being preached is just another chapter in the cultural imperialism of the United States, and reject it. So how do you address that? And in public diplomacy, how do you overcome that?
The Arab Spring was a great awakening on that subject, because I think we did see people coming around to the notion that they had something to say and that their voice mattered. So it began to challenge. It wasn't an American-led initiative that brought people to Tahrir Square. It wasn't an American push that brought Libyans to Benghazi. It wasn't an American who set himself or herself on fire in Tunisia. So I always like to remind people, we didn't impose that on anybody. So that begins to suggest that there are chords, or at least strains and strands in other parts of the world where the individual does think, or would like to think, that he or she might have a say or an idea that can be expressed freely or openly. But I think you make a good point, because there are structures. They can be religious, they can be cultural, they can be identity-based, they can be clan-based, they can be group-based, where the individual is not the empowerment agent. But I'm beginning to see a geometric change in this whole public diplomacy picture in the following sense. We used to, when you looked at the world, see things, imagine a rectangle. Things were very linear. Things happened horizontally in the world or vertically, and then we got smart and there was sort of a matrix. Then things went triangular on us. And you referenced it in your comments. The tip of the triangle is the grass tops, the leadership, the spear. The base of the triangle are all these individual local voices. And we're all aware that somewhere in there the triangle got flipped on its head. And the base, the grassroots, the local voices suddenly seem to be dictating what the leadership should do. We've left the rectangle. I think we're about to leave the triangle. And I think we're going into a circle. And this is tough and complex. Circles are wonderful, except they go round and around and around. And it's very hard to lead in a circle. If you've ever had, you can look at dinner parties. There's no head of the table in a circle. There's no real beginning or end. Social networking, media innovation, the internet, webs, blogs, Google tweets, they're circular in nature. You can cut in any place in the conversation. But I do worry you can get everybody out in the circle or in the square. You can even tell them what time the revolution is. But what do you do the day after? Who leads? Who decides if the individual should be empowered or not? Who decides if the religious figures are in control and whose voice will be heard? So all of us are going to have to wrestle with this. We love this circular model, but it poses some real challenges.
I think we have time for about one more question.
Yes?
Actually, I'm really interested in your topic about China. Several days ago, I also went to a lecture which is talking about women's role in international peace. And there is a lady sitting next to me. She was a scholar doing women's studies in China, and she told me that actually in China we do talk a lot about women, but the most significant difference between Chinese way and here in United States is that, well, basically the Chinese most focus on the women's attractiveness, their figures, or their social protocols, but they seldom talking about women's role in international peace or, national security. So, could you offer some suggestions, or what's your recommendations for the Chinese to do or to promote women's role in public diplomacy? Thank you.
Well, one is to have people like you at our universities and institutions raising that question, and I mean that very seriously. Every time you have a mix of people from different cultures in a room, it forces you to think about your role back home or your role here. So I would continue to be using your empowerment and your voice. On China, I wanted to say something about Chinese public diplomacy, which I've been following since 2003, when I first noted that a Chinese official had given a speech and used this phrase, public diplomacy. And I thought, wait, that's our thing. That's American. We do public diplomacy. And I began to watch very closely as China figured out that it needed to project its image on the world stage, and that it wanted to help frame its own narrative. And so I began to watch this trend, and not in a way that's frightening or scary, and this is something we should worry about. Quite the opposite. It's something we need to take note of and be challenged by, because the Chinese have a very sophisticated notion of public diplomacy. And I'll give you 3 examples of how I see it in this town. How many of you have opened a Washington Post recently on a Sunday and seen a China supplement?
Never
I just saw it. Okay, if everybody could get back to their seats, we'll start in just a moment. Okay, so a tough act to follow, a force of nature, Tara Sunshine, but I think we have just the panel to do it. We're going to be mixing in some video and the conversation, and what I want to do is start with Tiffany Roberts-Sahadak, who, among many other things, is the co-head coach with her husband at Virginia Commonwealth University for the women's soccer team. She is an Olympic gold medalist. She has won a World Cup. She was on the famous 1999 U.S. Women's World Cup team that we all know and love. She also made my children's day by signing soccer balls for them at lunch. So I'm going to be hero dad tonight. Tiffany, if you'd like to get us started. She's a longtime veteran of sports diplomacy programs abroad.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I think I'd like to just first start off by giving you a little bit of information about myself, and it will teach you a little bit more about what my perspective is and where I'm coming from, and what I think about when I go abroad and take part in these international exchange programs. But you know, it started when I was very young. I think I was in first grade, and I was watching the 1984 Olympics. And that is when I first saw Mary Lou Retton on TV, and I saw her win a gold medal, and I told my parents, that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be just like Mary Lou Retton, and I want to win gold medals. And they were like, all right, go for it. So that's kind of how it started. Years later, that spark, it sparked my passion on what I wanted to do, and it really kept me on track. And so fast forward, making the national team, going to the Olympics, winning that gold medal that I'd always dreamed of, now having the opportunity to be involved with programs like Sports United. When I go abroad, I'm thinking about myself as a little girl and what sparked my interest. And so when I'm there looking at these young girls, I'm thinking, you know, I can be that role model like Mary Lou Retton was for me. And so one of my goals when I go to other countries is just to spark that passion, because I found that once you have that passion, once you find that passion, you will be successful. So for these young girls and women to see a woman come into a program as a strong leader and a role model who's gone very far in sports, where obviously in a lot of the countries that I go to, the young girls are not supported in the way that I was supported here in the US. But I'm hoping one of my main goals is there is to inspire them to follow whatever it is that they want to do. So it could be in sports, it could be in soccer, it could be in journalism. It's whatever it is that they want to do, but just hoping that I can go there and be a leader for them and a role model just to help them spark that passion, just like Mary Lou Retton did for me when I was a young girl.
I wonder if you could describe what one of these programs that you do abroad looks like.
Sure.
What do you do? How long are you there? How much interaction do you have? What is the interaction, if any, beyond the soccer, et cetera?
Right. Uganda was my first trip. I went to Uganda. I went to the Philippines, Thailand. Most recently, I went to Brazil. And every program has been different, but they are jam-packed. I'm usually on the ground for 5 days, and it's different. In Thailand, I went, and it was a camp. It was a U.S.-Thai soccer camp, and I worked with the same kids, boys and girls, for 5 days straight, basically. And so half of their program was learning English, and then the other half of the program was soccer. When I went to Brazil, they put me all around the country, and we went to different areas, and I worked with different programs. So I was able to meet with a lot of different people. So it just depends on that embassy and what they want me to get accomplished while I'm there. But sometimes it's an all-girls program where I'm only meeting with girls. Sometimes I'm meeting with boys and girls. I sometimes meet with coaches and teach them about just our leadership skills and what we do in the U.S. Something that I definitely keep in mind when I go when I go abroad is that I get a lot out of going to other countries, and sometimes I think we're going there just to promote what we've learned. Sorry, no problem. What we've learned, what I've learned, what I do in the U.S. and promote our philosophies. But when I come back, it's definitely something that stays with me forever. It's life-changing, and it is an exchange. It definitely is an exchange, and I learned so much, not just from the coaches or the leaders of those countries, but also more I learned from the children and the girls and the little boys and girls that I work with.
And what do you learn from them? What do you get back? Because public diplomacy, the whole point of public diplomacy is it's a conversation.
Right.
It's two-way.
Exactly. And so I learned that we have so much in common. They look at me as this leader and Olympian, but I realized that we all started out just the same. Just with dreams and hopes and passions. And so I love that I see what their energy is like. I also learned that they have their struggles, speaking of young women going to other countries. You know, it's interesting, I learned that in every country that I've been to, we always do a question and answer at the end of the program or at the end of the day. And a lot of the, one of the main questions that I get asked by the young girls is, you know, what kind of challenges have you dealt with becoming a professional athlete or to be respected? You're looking at me like, I know, I deal with that too. You know, what kind of challenges? And what I've learned is that sometimes I feel silly telling about the challenges that I have come across throughout my career, because I feel as though our challenges, the challenges that they are dealing with, don't even come close to the challenges that I have been dealt with. So sometimes I feel like I'm out of place speaking, because sometimes it's two different worlds, but I still try and make that connection with them and still hope to inspire them, like I said earlier.
One last question before we move on and then come back for Q&A and broader conversation. But you mentioned that you've done programs, mixed gender programs and programs just for girls. I wonder if you could talk about, you know, the advantages to each or the challenges of each, and it mirrors something that we talked about at lunch that happens with sports and soccer in particular here in the United States, where at a certain age, girls have a chance to choose whether to play just with girls or to play in mixed gender leagues. I wonder if you could talk about that from the cultural diplomacy perspective or from the kind of work you're doing, you know, the differences in those two programs.
Sure. I love working in an environment I love both environments. When I'm working with just young girls and women, I feel like sometimes they're a little bit more comfortable and they get out of their comfort zone because we're in our little club. And I can really connect with the young girls, and then they start opening up to me and they tell me about stories, you know, with their family or with their friends, and so it becomes our little club that day or that week that I'm with them. And so, you know, and I think it's great when it's just the girls, because like I said, I think they can get out of their comfort zone. When the boys are there, what I like about that is that they are not used to seeing a woman in a leadership role, and especially one that can juggle a soccer ball and score goals on them. And so what I love to do is use soccer. Obviously, they have a lot of respect for soccer in other countries, these boys, right? And the men, even the male coaches, okay? So when I go over there and I'm speaking to male coaches on my philosophy on coaching, and then I can actually play too, I gain some respect right away, and I think that's so great. That's what I love about soccer and being in soccer, and then be able to travel around the world, because it's a global sport and we all have the same passion. So, but anyway, for the boys and the men to see a female in a leadership role, not only speaking to them about my philosophies, but also, you know, the confidence that I bring or the self-esteem that I can show them, and hopefully I'm helping them, you know, have respect for the young girls in the future and other women.
Right. Now, at some point, Tiffany is going to have to cut out. She's actually has a game tonight that she's coaching. She actually drove all the way down here just for this, which we really appreciate. I want to go to Tony Blackman, who is I'm sorry, I'm losing my chart here. No, I'm trying to get this particular title right, because she was not only as a hip hop artist, but the State Department named her the first ever hip hop artist to work as an American cultural specialist. And Tony, I wonder if you could talk about the work that you do. Although before you do that, I'd like to show everybody a little clip of the type of music that you do. wonder if you could help us understand, what is it about hip-hop per se that is particularly well-suited to cultural diplomacy, and particularly for women and girls, although not exclusively by any means. For those of you who aren't aware, hip-hop music is being increasingly used as part of cultural diplomacy efforts by the U.S. State Department. There's been a number of examples just in the last 2 weeks in Egypt and Lebanon of acts that are part of a global tour, for instance. Much in the way that back in the early days of U.S. public diplomacy, the jazz ambassadors, Dave Brubeck and Louis Armstrong and others, went around the world sharing jazz with the world. So I wonder if you could talk about it from a contemporary perspective, and hip-hop specifically. What does that happen?
Well, I think first, I would, I have a big voice, let me sit back. That's a nice way of saying big mouth. My brother calls it big mouth. First, I would, we did 2 videos in this residency in Kinshasa, and I would have chosen the other video for this because we're focusing on girls and women. And in the other song, the video we shot is called Invisible Woman. And I had performed for the artist at the beginning to introduce myself, and the women said, most of whom didn't speak any English, they said, we feel this poem, Invisible Woman. We want to do this poem, we want to do this song, and so we translated it into French and created a song, and there were 4 Congolese female singers and 3 Congolese female rappers, and there was a guy playing guitar, and we created this very beautiful piece. And because it had so much feeling, because when the women spoke, you could feel them. Even the Americans who couldn't understand them could feel them. So the videos become very popular, and it's girl-centric. And it also was born out of a residency where I was partnered with a male Congolese facilitator who wasn't very enthusiastic about being partnered with me. And so I realized that we were gonna shoot this song, which I didn't think was a great song. And I was like, well, do you mind if I take the girls and we go do some poetry? He says, Tony's going to do poetry with the ladies. And so he brushed us off, and I feel like what we created was much more compelling, much more provocative, and much more emotional, because that's what women bring to the table, is heart and emotion and a willingness to go to the gut and cry. Now remember that, guys, women love when a man can shed a tear every once in a while as well. And I think hip-hop moves people because it's the voice. And the voice, we forget, we get caught up on language, but the voice is also an instrument. And when you have a hip-hop beat and you have this percussive situation going on with the music, the human voice almost becomes another instrument, and the musicality of the voice adds something. And if the performer is good at communicating and expressing emotions and ideas, you will feel them. That's why we can listen to a song in Wolof, not understand it, and like it. That's why we can be entertained by these different kinds of arts. And I think hip-hop, because it's rooted in communication, it's rooted in standing up, it's rooted in honoring yourself, it's rooted in representing where you're from, no matter where you're from, and it's about celebrating who you are. I forgot, I didn't start with my disclaimer. When I say hip-hop, I'm talking about 2%, not the 2% that most people get to see on television and radio. What mainstream radio and television shows of hip-hop represents exactly 2.2% of what hip-hop is. The other 98% around the world doesn't get exposure in mainstream media. There's dance, there's visual art, there is vocal percussion and beatboxing as a form of art, there is the rap, there is the DJing, there are all these things that happen in hip-hop music and culture that express spirituality, that express religion, that express feelings and emotions, the love songs, celebration of one's parents, that tells true, authentic stories from the heart. That does not get represented. So sometimes when we talk about hip-hop diplomacy, we think we're talking about Lil Wayne, or Jay-Z, or 50 Cent. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the art and the culture, and that's why you can send artists who people have never heard of, and the audience responds to them. Because when it is an authentic expression of hip hop music and culture, it's not about fame. It's about feeling. It's about music. It's about the song. And I think that's why the hip hop diplomacy work. It also works because it reaches across generations. So we also get confused because we think of hip hop as a teeny bopper phenomenon and it reaches the young. This is true. It does reach the youth. But hip hop started in the mid-1970s here in the US, all right? It started somewhere in the 80s in some other countries, in the late 80s in other countries. Even with that, hip hop is an adult. Now it may behave as a juvenile delinquent on MTV, but it's an adult now. And so you will have people who have their children at the concerts with them. You will have people doing songs with their sons and their daughters now. In Brazil, there was a grandmother, a daughter, and the granddaughter rapping together. Now, unfortunately, we live in a country and a culture where, that doesn't happen. We barely sing together anymore, which I think is gonna be my next retirement job, fighting for the arts, because I think that we should be singing before every meeting. But that's just me. I'm a quirky poet.
You clearly haven't heard me sing.
But that's why I'm sorry. I'm feeling very passionate today. So
don't stop.
Okay. Because this is what's happened recently. Because hip hop is a popular culture, because it is so commodified, I've been experiencing various levels of criticism from some peers and from those in industry and those in academia who were questioning why myself and some of my colleagues choose to work with an institution, a government institution like the State Department. And how do we justify being real artists and working with the government? That's like working with a big business. And people not understanding it, and that's why I've become so passionate about it. Because with the critiques and the judgments, it's forced me to really be clear about why I chose to do this work, why I continue to do the work. And even with learning some hard lessons, and even with me being the guinea pig, you know how it is when you're the first. It's like being the oldest child, and your baby sister got better treatment than you, but that sort of thing. But it's because I believe in the beauty of music and art to change our world and to build relationships. And because hip hop, there's a hip hop network. Hip hop was we were the first arts community on the internet. And when people were just getting email addresses. And so I remember connecting with these artists in South Africa and in Taiwan, and we built these relationships. And then I later got to meet these people via assignments and posts that I did with the various embassies. But we all started on the internet because hip hop also has, I don't know why it is, but it's a sort of a counterculture even though it's mainstream. And it continually gives birth to itself over and over again. And this is a thing that I started saying, I went to college here in DC and I started teaching Hip Hop 101 for teachers and educators. And I remember saying, because the teachers wonder why someone as smart as I would affiliate with hip hop, bless them. But they said, and I had to explain, I said, look, you can take me anywhere in the world. You can drop me in Morocco, you can drop me in Zimbabwe, you can drop me in Japan. If you can show me where the hip hop heads are, the people who love it, the same way the jazz people love jazz, I know I have a place to sleep tonight and something to eat. And so that's the kind of heart that we bring to it. So when I show up in South Africa at the consulate in Johannesburg, they think 30 people are coming. 95 show up. And they're like, how did that happen? Well, I put online, I told one person I was coming, and then through the global network, and then they think that they're coming, the staff thought they were coming there to rap. No, they're coming because they want to talk about, okay, I want to do teaching art. I want to figure out how to use hip hop in the schools. I want to figure out how to use hip hop to promote this idea of how we're going to get environmental support in my community in terms of raising funds for this clean water program we're doing. And there are all these things that people don't realize. This is what artists do in general. It's not just hip hop. This is why artists are critical to our world, their survival, and why we have to help artists be able to live sustainable lives, because artists do the work that no one else wants to do. And so that I think that's the end of my commentary.
No, it's a perfect segue, though, to bring in Sultana, who is, as you've seen from her bio, an award-winning Moroccan hip-hop star, I think it's fair to say at this point, and who, as I mentioned, will be performing tonight at the Marrakesh Lounge in Adams Morning. But Sultana, I wonder, well, first let's play a video from Sultana, and then have you chime in on some of the things Tony raised. I wonder if you could also talk about some of the themes that Tony was raising, but particularly from the perspective of
Yeah,
a.
I was waiting for this one.
There's actually 2 videos. Oh, there's 2. Go ahead. Yeah. All right. Actually, it's even, I'm glad, thank you, because it's an even better segue to my question, which is if you could draw out some of these things, particularly from the perspective of a woman hip-hop artist who's making music in Morocco, in this case, about women's lives in Morocco and how you draw that out and how programs like this help or help you do that. And particularly your experience, you're coming here and you've done some tours here as well.
Yeah. First of all, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you
Walaikum
for
salam.
bringing me here. Sultana, she's a girl that she experienced like hip hop from the age of 13 years old as a big girl. Then, and especially I was like studying in ALC, American Language Center, so I knew what Tupac said in his songs, what Aretha Franklin said in her songs. So then I was like, I saw at that time it was just interdit in French. It's something that the girl can't do, to sing or dance, because it was like a taboo. In our religion, some people said that singing is haram. But we're not singing something that it's not like we say in Arab world, fitna. We are singing about something that is real, about abuse in our country. In my country, abuse is mentally, physically, and every day, like by insults, by words, by media, by everything. So I was like the girl that want to change something, but I have never the chance to change that because I was so shy, and I had that idea of taboos, of haram, not to sing, not to dance. But after that, in 2008, when I had a very bad problem with a festival in Morocco, international festival Mawazin, and at that time I was like sure that, yeah, we have to say something about women, about girls in Morocco. They don't have the right to do a lot of things. Even if she is so talented, she can't sing, she can't dance, she can't any kind of arts, she can't do it. So especially in Mawazin, we won the prize, the first prize of our king Mohammed Sadis. So the prize, it was a video clip and an album, but they didn't do it. When the journalists asked the organizers about why they didn't do the the prize. He said that they are just girls, they will get married and they will forget about art. And then I was shocked because it's Morocco. It's Morocco. There is an international festival there. They bring Whitney Houston, they bring Santana, they bring this year they will bring Pitbull and Lady Gaga and Katy Perry, and they still think that girls, they will get married and they will stay at home and they will. It was the most shocking thing in my life. So I'm trying now to, and after my song Sawt Nisa Women's Voice, that I'm talking about prostitution in Morocco. There is a lot of girls that prostitute just for making living, and this is the reason. Like, those girls, they are struggling to make this living for their families. So why I'm going to call her that name, or I'm going to do a lot of bad things to this girl because she's just making a living to her family. I started from this topic, and then I was like going to other small villages in Morocco to do bénévole concerts and to do some workshops to make those girls, give them how I am now, Sultana, like how to rhyme, how to talk, how to tell what you want to tell. Because in Morocco, you don't have the right to tell everything. We don't have that freedom of expression or of talk. So we need those girls to talk. And after my visit to United States last year, I was in the program of IVL for the embassy. And when I came back to Morocco, I went to a lot of rappers, girls and men, and I told them that, as Tony said, it's not what you see in MTV or in movies from United States, what happening in United States. Mm-hmm. It's not the same at all. It's just 2% of hip hop. So the people there, they are like, the girls, they want to be like Nicki Minaj or something like that, but it's not. I was like, people or rapper in America, they are not so vulgar. They are just talking like us. They're talking about topics, real topics. Even if they're not known, they're not famous, but they are existing in United States. And people there, they are so simple. So now I want to make this hip hop change in Morocco, to be like, to build that self-confidence in art, especially for girls. Because girls, they can do what they want to do.
Right, that's great. And it's very interesting hearing you talk about what your experience here in the United States as well, what you brought back to Morocco from that and this issue of the 2%. I want to bring in Global Girls Media, Therese Steiner, who is the founder of Global Girls Media and the president, and Tumi Masadi, from a veteran of the program from South Africa. I think you've got the production all queued up, so I will defer to you as to when we start playing stuff. But
okay, thank you. I first want to give a big Global Girls shout out to you, Sean, to Mary Jeffers, and to all of you at the Institute of Public Diplomacy and Global Communications for inviting us here today. Global Girl Media was started by a group of filmmakers and journalists who really felt that the woman's voice and the girl's voice was missing in the global dialogue. And we were looking for a way to empower girls to have a voice and to feel their opinion matters, not only in their own communities, but to a global world. And thank you, Tara Sonnenschein, because I feel like she produced the Global Girl Media Manual. We launched in 2010 in Soweto at the FIFA World Cup with a small grant, a very important seed grant from the U.S. mission in South Africa. And from that grant, we were able to leverage money to launch in South Africa, in Soweto, and in Los Angeles, and now we have a bureau in Morocco as well. So what started off as a program in the Rosa Parks Library in Soweto now has produced 70 journalists, female girl journalists around the world. that have produced stories that have been seen on global networks such as ESPN and the BBC and Intranews and about 30 different networks. Now, why does Global Girl matter? Global Girl matters because we teach girls, we give them the journalistic skills, the leadership skills, and the self-esteem skills to really make a difference in their world and their communities. None of these girls had ever held a camera, had ever done a video, had ever written a news blog. Many of them had never been on a computer before training with Global Girl Media. And within a couple of days, these girls were able to go out and conduct interviews with Joe Biden, Hugh Masekela, Olympic gold medal athlete and soccer teammate, Julie Foudy, Eve Ensler. They produce stories that really reflect their lives. We target girls from marginalized communities, many of whom are victims of abuse, many of whom have HIV or HIV impacted, and their stories reflect the reality of their everyday world. Last summer in Soweto, we had an amazing training where we trained 10 girls, and here they are, HIV positive team of journalists, and Tumi Mosadi, who's our South African program director, will share with you a little bit about the transformation of these girls.
Yeah, so as Therese said, we trained 10 HIV positive girls. 2 of them had it from birth. 3, one was raped at the age of 6, and then 7 of the girls got it from partners they trusted. And then also 4 of the girls were mothers, and 4 also admitted to being emotionally, sexually, and physically abused to people close to them. So none of these girls knew each other at the beginning of the program. I basically worked with local NGOs to select the girls. I interviewed about 20 girls, and the girls had to write essays about why they want to be in the program and their aspirations and dreams. So from the 20 I interviewed, I selected these 10 girls. They've never met before for 3 weeks, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday to Saturday. We were in a very small conference room, much smaller than this conference room, well conditioned, and we all had to learn to get along and learn basically the curriculum, the journalism curriculum. And apart from, I think our hardest lessons were the personal lessons and the emotional lessons that we learned from each other. And it sometimes felt like we were on Dr. Phil because of the high emotional levels the girls can get to. There were a lot of fights, a lot of bickering, but at the end of the day, they learned to all work together. So we have one of the girls in the program, Evelyn. She was very headstrong. She still is very headstrong, very aggressive, a very defensive personality. She had a you can't tell me nothing type of attitude. She, on the first day of the program, the official first day, she went missing. Nobody knew where she was. The girls were being picked up from home. Her grandmother didn't know where she was. She went missing for the whole weekend. She was out partying. And she showed up to the program 10 o'clock in the morning, walked in. She apologized and sat there and started working with her team. She was very aggressive to all the other girls, but she actually turned out to be one of our strongest reporters. She has very good interviewing skills. She was very good on camera, and she knew what she wanted out of all her stories. She had a story, we produced a story together called Teen Debate, where she challenged her classmates to talk about HIV, AIDS, and sex. And in the process revealed to them, including the teacher, that she was HIV positive and how she plans to change her life, and hopefully she can change the life of her peers around Soweto and school, all over South Africa, basically. I think we have a story to show. Yeah, we have a story.
This is Emily Mukela reporting for Global Girl Media. I'm at my school, Josiah Kumalo Educational Center. Every day my classmates and I talk about sex and HIV and AIDS. It occurred to me that most youth are ignorant when it comes to the issue concerning HIV/AIDS. I challenged my class to a debate about the issues. Guys, do you think girls are used?
I want to engage our part. Yeah, bona baluse. Yabo angangenzela noma yini ngasiphi isikhathi. Yabo mangithi njengamanje akadoje esikoleni ngizosika ikhekhe amadoje.
So guys, how many peers do you think makes a girl to drop her panties down?
Ito lezi choose enough. Lesalahlisayo bese ngiyafika ngishaya down.
a o tsogele di-risk tsa gore o tla tshwara ke di-drop di-cauliflower di-eng
gona ga se ke le moeng wa go ja ga ke tshwele nix nte condom e right go e sebediswa magano sometimes is condom o e sebedisa ga utlwe nix ka ga o taue so ga o taua o sebedisa condom ga o e utlwe monate tshwanetse o ntshe o ebele kwa o utlwe monate wa ntho
hayi condom ngiyalimaza yathona ngoba manje flesh to flesh kumele ngisheshe ichame vele yathona manje icondom ayithatha kade nema ngilakile namaphi yabo ngifuna uchama mina mfethu
okuzwitse mama ba bangata lo mpotsa ha mpotsa gore na condom ke amjetse mama se ba twetsa ntho o tso tsamaya ba bangata banyana mo life and bona ba bangata.
But I mean, on my side, I think that boys are losers because they are the ones that bring AIDS to us. Because anything born at it's fine. Like born, they have to be good born. They have to be careful. Not we have to be careful, but born they have to be more careful. So they have to go to we have to bring condoms, blah blah blah. But this is not like us.
I'm sure it's like second I'm sure it's spread.
Rato, like, do you know anything about HIV and AIDS?
How old am I? It's about what can I put this out?
But to you, it's still like, how about who condomize? How about who is an expert? It's about HIV and AIDS. Yeah, we have like.
Condom and the matter, and so I'm not. How about I exercise? I can be high feet good. I'm not going to test. I'm going to chill out. Yeah, so when I got kids about negative, I can go for a test. Get low.
I lead into the HIV that test
because yabo masusiqala isitha sakho uyosaba ukuyenza ezinye izinto kumele uzenze yabo in future manje mina ngeke ngithethe ngamtshela ukuthi foko ayakubone lokho amnandi abantu.
Okay, my advice ukuthi mangabe usengekho kuleso simo ukuthi soqalelelana nabafana vele ungayenga or ukhohlisa abangani vele uhlezi nje ngoba unjalo uziphathe kahle, don't go to the party, uhlezi encwadini zakho mangabe uyafunda until uzocede esikoleni sofika isikhathi ukintini isikhathi sakho.
As you know, HIV and AIDS, this person is HIV positive. Like, okay, can I ask people, do you think I'm HIV positive? Okay, plus, I'm HIV positive. I found out that I was HIV positive in 2009 when I was pregnant. As like I disclosed my status to you, it's up to you whether you mistreat me or you treat me as you used to treat me like before. So I'm doing this for us. Because of I know I used to go out clubbing, doing what. I didn't even care about anyone else. If like you don't want to change, you can stay the way you are. But it's about reconcile. HIV and AIDS thing. I get we don't believe for a thing until we the purpose. I'm a Zusi. Manje umuntu obulawa AIDS, umuntu ongafuni ukuthatha treatment. So guys, yeah, when I change the way after I said what I said, what would you have something to say?
And fit, yabo manje sifakwe ezinye ingqondo akusifakwe ezinye ingqondo mfethu ayina ngathi sesostop kuyenza lento mfethu asenyasaba manje asenyasaba mfethu ayinyasaba mfethu
hayi nhle nakhona lento sitsheliwe lenhle kuyasithusa yabo.
Also, the girls produced 30-minute compilation documentaries of stories of being a teen mother, living with HIV, AIDS, as a caregiver, being an HIV/AIDS caregiver.
Raped by somebody you trust.
Yes, and we went around the schools in Johannesburg, in the Gauteng province, 10 high schools and about 3 community centers to screen the documentary. And at some schools, we actually had girls come up on stage and disclose their status in front of the school, just to show the power of how social media, and just for the girls to have cameras in their hands and tell their own stories and their own voices can impact and change lives.
Just a word about Evelyn. She became, as you can see, this amazing, she had a real sense of the camera and timing that it was just phenomenal. And I said, you know, look, Evelyn, go on YouTube and look up Christiana Amanpour. She asks tough questions, and you really can learn from her. So she comes running back. She said, her questions aren't tough enough. She was amazing. If you could go to the next slide, please. We should say that this group of HIV-positive girls has been granted full press credentials to come to Washington, D.C. this summer and cover the World AIDS Conference. This is, needless to say, unprecedented in the history of the conference and an amazing opportunity for these girls. And I think what Global Girl Media is about and shows is there are many reports on girls. Go in and there's, you know, Katie Kirk going in reporting teenage girls in Soweto, but you do not hear reports from the girls themselves, and this is what Global Girl Media is about. These are some pictures from our 3 bureaus. Left, obviously, is in Morocco. In the center, we have our 2 youngest HIV-positive reporters. Sichle was so short that she had to stand on a crate in order to be eye level with her interviewees. And we have a girl from our Global Girl office in bureau in Los Angeles. Never underestimate the power of a girl and her pen. The quote up top is from one of our girls in South Africa, Fortunate, and it really shows what the transformation of this program can do for young girls. I saw a dream come true. I believed in myself. I had a future. So our model for Global Girl Media, we feel is a successful model. We're looking to launch in London and Chicago this year, and we are going global. Next slide, please. This is one of our models is a cross-cultural model where we do exactly what Tara Sonnenschein recommended. We like to bring together girls from different bureaus who don't know each other to have a cultural exchange, and they do that by literally working together and reporting. So on the left, we have our reporter Rocio from Los Angeles who interviewed Ambassador Milan Bevere at the International Women's Media Foundation conference here, and Lungile from South Africa, who's with Amy Goodman from NPR, who reported from the Sundance Film Festival. And we have a team of girls who have been invited to the film Our World, Our Voice, the Global Girl Media South Africa film has been invited to be presented at the Global Youth Olympiad in England this summer, and they also want a team of global girls from different countries to come and report on the Olympiad. Next slide, please. Holding the camera was like holding the future in my hands. We heard this from girls and from different confidence and different continents and different classes. There's something about the camera that really empowers. We're very proud of Tumi, and this is a Global Girl graduate from our 2010 class, Anna Seiko, and both were selected to be 2 of 75 women across South Africa chosen to be the future female leaders of South Africa, and got to meet First Lady Michelle Obama. Part of our model is we want to be sustainable in each country. We want to work with local talent such as Tumi and help provide professional development for her. Anna is an intern was in our first class, and she interned with our group last year. So another part of our model is we want to train girls, employ the girls, get employment for the girls, and we'd love to have girls from different bureaus actually train other girls in other countries. Next slide, please. This is our Global Girl Media team on graduation day. I wanted to show this slide because this is in the community center with the Rosa Parks Library, which is U.S. Consulate Library in Soweto. Melissa Klieg-Tripp is on the far left, is a PAO officer. 2 people from the embassy helped us throughout the training, Pam and Salilo. And we had 2 interns from last year, and up on the far right, this is our volunteer intern, my daughter, but it was an incredible experience. I think, you know, when you think about global diplomacy and what it means, it was interesting this morning to hear Frank talk about the power of the individual as being a real American phenomenon, something that we all believe in. Global Girl Media is about that. It's about freedom of speech. It's about freedom of equality for all. And lastly, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, I think to be a good diplomat and to be really good in cultural diplomacy and to be successful in life, you got to learn how to be part of a team. And when you're working on a television production, you have got to be part of a team. You've got to trust other members of the team. You've got to pitch each other's stories. This was the hardest thing for these girls to learn because they had never had the opportunity to be on a team. in their education, they weren't exposed to sports, and I think that was a real gift. So, thank you.
Wonderful. And before we go to questions, our last speaker, and then we can sort of wrap it all together, is Belia Zimbabwe. Is that close? Close enough. Thank you. My English is very poor, so don't take it personally. He was a basketball coach from Zimbabwe who's played at the national level and also runs something called Going for Gold, which is involved in getting people interested and involved in the Olympic movement, and has done a number of these types of programs. Also has a background, an empirical background in market research and things like that. So we'll like to talk to you a little bit also about, from that perspective, thinking about what kinds of things work and how would we know whether these things are working the way we want. Are they empowering women and girls? But why don't you give us a sense of what you do?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here and speak to you guys today. I just thought about this, that someone once said to me, an indicator of where a country is going is how it treats its women. That's a big indicator, and that rang so true to me. I'm here on an exchange program, Sports United, that's through the State Department, with 5 other countries. We are here with under 17 girls, just to experience how sport is approached in America. I've always believed that you desire what you see. And I think this program is great in that it takes girls from all over the world and brings them into this great country to see just what other girls get up to and just how far they can go in achieving their dreams. I was very happy to hear Tiffany say her dream came true. I mean, she watched it on TV, and it's amazing that in this country she was able to see it and dream about it and actually achieve it. I'm sure there's millions of girls out there that watch TV and dream about it, but are just not able to or are not given the support to actually achieve their dreams. I would love a situation where more countries would adopt this sports diplomacy program, because you find that most African countries are colonized maybe by the French and other first world countries. I think it would actually be an easier dialogue, even in terms of language and culture and stuff like that. And I really commend the US for this amazing program. Basically, I want to really thank the embassy in Zimbabwe as well for reaching out to us. The other countries are like Nicaragua, Thailand, Kazakhstan, Tunisia, Ukraine, and I feel very blessed that Zimbabwe, with the relations that we have, was actually included in this program. The embassy selected 3 girls from completely different backgrounds, which for me is very important. We have a girl that is whose mom is a doctor, very privileged, private school. We have a girl from a high-density suburb who had absolutely nothing but benefited from a program that's actually from the US called Hoops for Hope, which is a basketball program. So they've paid for her education, and she's come through that rank. And then we've got a girl from a smaller town that is very intelligent, who's got a single mom, who's worked hard to get her through school and stuff like that. And for me, just getting this perfect mixture of girls from different backgrounds to come here and experience this and then go back home to their societies, and just that feedback is going to be very important in encouraging the girl child to
Mm-hmm. Now, is this your first trip to the United States?
Absolutely, it is.
And you just arrived yesterday, right?
On Sunday morning.
Sunday morning, okay.
Yeah.
So, as someone who's done these programs over there, or been a part of them, and now you're coming here, from the perspective of someone beginning an exchange, coming to the United States, what are your expectations, hopes? What do you hope to bring
up? I mean, first of all, it is just before I even got off the plane, I realized there's female pilots out there. I'm like, okay, this is good. We're driving to the hotel, and the metro, there's a female
driving them. You're like, okay, you know, there's females driving school buses and stuff like that. And for me, some of these things are like totally taboo in our country. You know, I mean, it's so fascinating. I had very high expectations, but as of in these 2 days, it's like they've even gotten higher. And for me to be sitting here and speaking to you is just so amazing. And I feel completely blessed. And I hope me being here, maybe, you know, going back home with my little paper, with my name, will encourage a girl out there to try and, I mean, look, to be honest with you, I have stuck it out with basketball for a very long time. We went through a very difficult time in my country, and you went through a situation where people asked you, why do you bother? I mean, things are, you should be looking for food or something. Why are you going to basketball? Why are you doing this, you know? And I can go back home and say, you know what, I stuck it out. I've never been to the United States, but now I've had this opportunity, and hoping this is not going to be the last time, hoping moving forward we'll continue to work together with the State Department and make other people's dreams come true.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to get questions here very quickly, but Teresa, I wonder if you could address a question that underlies all of these types of programs, which is funding. These are, you know, what we've been talking about are mostly, well, are all State Department funded programs, public diplomacy programs. However, the public diplomacy budget is obviously much lower than certain other budgets, Defense Department, development, et cetera. And so we're having to, you know, hear these amazing stories about these great programs, but then try and think about how to continue the programs when the funding runs out. In your case, if you could very briefly describe what kind of funding you had in terms of duration and what you have to do now to sustain these programs and the hoops you have to go through, very briefly though.
Oh, first of all, thank you for asking this question. All of our seed money has come basically from State Department grants, which has been phenomenal. So in Morocco, we did an embassy grant, South African embassy grant, and we have a seed grant in London for the Olympics. We've been able to raise money from some individual funding organizations, but mostly all foundations. So we got some money from National Endowment for the Arts. We got some money from individual foundations. Nike Foundation contributed to the World Cup coverage. We were able to get some distribution funding, meaning we actually got paid for our content, the World Cup by ESPN, which is fantastic. And we have funding from some individuals. Latino Public Broadcasting has given us a small grant to do a series in Los Angeles in Spanish with our East LA girls. Funding is extremely difficult. Our goal is to be sustainable. I think we have a model in South Africa where we have now, thanks to Tumi's hard work, we have a local NGO in South Africa, so we're able to raise money in South Africa for South African monies. But their anticipation is that, well, it's America, you should be able to find the money. And our goal is we want you to be sustainable so you can continue on and on and on. It's extremely difficult. We are going to be looking to corporations and corporate social responsibility. We're in a position now that we can go for larger funding, like to bigger foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation. I'm putting a plea to all of you involved in government here for a very tiny amount of money, respectively, for all of this amazing cultural diplomacy that's happened by everyone, you know, who's on this panel and in this room. You get amazing benefits on the other side. And I don't know how the lobbying situation works internally, but one of the challenges for us is finding organizations that are not just country specific in the government, but can really help us have a global presence. It's hard.
Food for thought.
It's hard.
I've got a million things I could ask, but I'd much rather engage the audience. PJ.
Thanks, Sean. I mean, really questions for the whole panel, and perhaps stemming from what Sultana was talking about in terms of performing, but then immediately confronting questions about what is haram, or for, you know, we have our own experience with the inspiration of the '84 World Cup soccer team, but then we're aware that the Iranian national soccer team had to forfeit its match because not allowed to play in a hijab. Or we hear about King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia forecasting that women won't be allowed to vote, but then they'll have to have a man drive them to the polling station. So from a sports standpoint, from a performing standpoint, from a media standpoint, are you optimistic that as these respective movements confront these cultural barriers, that in fact through them cultures and habits and traditions will in fact change? And if so, how long will it take? Simple question.
I think you all know that in Morocco we have this change of government, and unfortunately that no woman in the government now. There is no woman. Like the Islamists, they took place in the government, and there is no woman there, just one woman, and she's not even had that what we can say, I can't speak like English. So she's not powerful in her chair as men. So this is just one example of the future in Morocco or in Arab world. You can't find women in government, so you can find women in other places. But I think if, like with these exchange programs with the whole world, maybe the people there in Morocco, they will talk about it, because we don't have that revolution as Egypt or Syria or Tunisia. But there is people that they are onto these things and they are trying to change these things. So I think I will be a little bit like hoping for a good change for women and for men, both of them in my country.
I'd like, Tumi, maybe you could also address some.
Well, I'm sure everybody knows South Africa is a democratic country, tongue twister. The thing is, with us, women have the power to be anything and do anything that they want. The problem lies on the ground, where we as women encourage other women to pursue what they want to do in life, to give them opportunities to be better than what they are, to change their lifestyles and who they are. I mean, it still happens that young girls, the difference between the boys and the girls, the boys will go to school, like the girls will go to school. When we get home, the boys will go out and play soccer and be with the friends. But as girls, you have chores to do. You get home, you have to clean, you have to pick up your little sisters and brothers, feed them, cook supper, and by the time you're done do laundry, and by the time you're done, it's 8 p.m. in the evening and you still have to do your homework. And then it begins again the next day. So we don't have a system where as women, even though the government has a ministry for women and children, but they really have not done anything to help women upgrade themselves. It's just there in name only. And these type of organizations, they're starting up little by little. The organizations, they're women, professional women, CEOs and professional doctors, lawyers who are starting up organizations to help empower the young women in our country.
Yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me. My name is Anastasia Koshkin, and I'm a Russian Fulbrighter. And
just turn the volume down. Yeah.
And my question is about the fact how on the grounds in the countries.
Just the,
When you go abroad, how the fact that your programs are sponsored by the State Department, how is this received? How many people, how well are people aware of that, and whether it is a factor? Is it a positive factor? Is it a neutral, negative factor? How does this play out?
As Teresa said, while we're looking for money in South Africa from South African companies and government, most of the response is, but you're sponsored by the American government. They have money. Why are you coming to us to look for money? And we are in social media. Social media, I think 20% of South Africans use, not 20%, maybe about 30, 35% use the internet, have access to computers, and cell phones are very big. Almost every second person has a cell phone. But it's not something that is like a necessity. And to them, it's still a luxury. We're still a luxury. What we're doing is still play. We're still playing, you know. We're not really well, we are improving people's lives, but it's not something that's necessary for now. It doesn't feed anybody. It doesn't put clothes on somebody's back. So the feeling is, you're working with the Americans, they know how to raise money. So you'll get your money.
Tony, you addressed this a little bit in your remarks.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I feel like the hip hop has worked so effectively is there's something that happens artist to artist. If you land in Morocco or if you land in Thailand, wherever, and you have those folks who do question, like, why is it you're working with the government? But the artists want to know, why are you here and how can we connect? What can I learn from you and what can I share with you? Because we've never had an opportunity to have this connection before. And so the artists bring a different kind of heart to the conversation, and I think that happens. There are countries where it's much more tense and a little bit, you know, but I could say, you know, in the several countries I've been to, there was only one where the questions were loud and somewhat hostile and unsafe.
Well, other than the last part, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Loud and hostile is another kind of exchange. The last part's a problem. But I wonder, you know, on the same question, you know, what's it like when you go back now?
Well, I wanted to just mention, just before her question, that the first thing absolutely for me is to get the girls to actually believe in themselves. It's one thing to say that, okay, we want more women in positions of power and stuff like that. But you know, for me, women and the girl child, like in Africa, has been abused for so long, they don't even believe they can do it. They're the first thing, I mean, if they see someone doing great, the first thing they think is, could I possibly do that? I don't think, not me. I mean, there's no way I could do that. So for me, programs like these are very important in just getting the girls to actually believe that they can do absolutely anything they want. And like he asked, like, when do you think this is gonna, we're gonna see the benefits of this? I promise you, in the next 15 years, I'm sure I could be the president of Zimbabwe by that time, definitely. But yeah. So going forward, definitely, you're gonna see the benefits of it.
We have time for maybe one more before our next. Yep.
My question is for Tony and Sultana. Talking about public diplomacy and it trying to be like a two-way street, communicating, how do we take that 98% that we're not hearing about here in America and even in other countries and really expose Americans and people in different countries to hip-hop throughout the world? And how do we kind of like bridge that gap so that people just don't think of us as, you know, the Lil Wayne, Nicki Minaj kind of thing? There are people here who are rapping about real things. How do we get the two-way exchange where Americans are going overseas as well as we're bringing people here to America?
First of all, it's not the fault of American people, of the United States. It's the fault of MTV, of media. Because media, they just bring the infotainment and show business. So if they want to bring money, they have to put Nicki Minaj on TV. So I think the media can change all these point of views, and if we can like just change 1%, maybe we can change after that 10%, and it continues like that. So I think media will be the one who can like change this view of United States of America and Las Vegas and Nicki Minaj and stuff like that, and think about like the people in George Washington University that I think they are so lucky because we don't have like this universities in Morocco. So people, they think that American people, they are just singing, they're just dancing, and this is the life. So I think that we can just bring all Arab people to United States of America to see how people live in here. So I think that media has to to change these things by bringing the real music, bringing the movies that talk about something that is true in the United States, and especially documentaries about United States.
And I want to add, I think that's a really tough question, because I think there are a lot of arts institutions, arts presenters, orchestras, symphonies, arts educators trying to answer that question themselves right now, and no one's come up with anything because the music industry is a huge machine. And yes, it's profit driven, but we live in a capitalist country, and so profit is important. And I think the next phase of this has to be, and this is what I talk to a lot of younger artists who I think are really talented about, is that we have to commit ourselves to being lifelong learners, and we have to commit to being students, and so that you don't have to become a business person, you don't have to become a CEO, but we must be business savvy. And I know one of my personal challenges is that you can tell I'm a passionate creative, which means I can be overly emotional at times. And what I've had to do is recommit myself to discovering who I am and how I think, and then being able to ally myself with MBA students. I have a lot of friends who are MBAs for now. And I have a lot of friends who are lawyers now, where I didn't before. All of my friends were artists, tree huggers, Birkenstock wearing, lovers of, vegan food and stuff. And now I've expanded. I eat with people who eat pork chops, and it doesn't bother me because these people have really great brains, and they're problem solvers and they're strategists. And I think we who love music and art, who understand the power it has to impact and change our world, to be used as a tool for cultural diplomacy, have to become much more serious and less idealistic about how to strategize getting the other 98% to the consumers and to the masses and to the people, because I think that's where change really can lie. I mean, we're frustrated with healthcare debate, make a good song. You have 100,000 people standing up and, to make sure that I get to see my dentist when I want to.
I guess a great segue to our next panel, which we're going to go directly to. So if Derek's going to come up and start laying out some chairs while I introduce our next panel, and we're just going to sit up front. But first, a big hand, please, for that. Our next panel, we have Ambassador Adam Airlie, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs. Lisa Delpy Nairati, did I get that close? I did, wow, miracle. Associate Professor of Tourism and Sports Management here at the George Washington University. And Mary Jeffers, my colleague, who is the Public Diplomacy Fellow at the Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication this year, and a Senior Foreign Service Officer herself. Please join us. I will sit on the end. Okay, so we have a little mixed mic. Not a mixed master mic. Okay. Ambassador, I wonder if you could get us started talking about cultural diplomacy, and we've had an amazing day. We had Tara, obviously, at the beginning, sort of laying out the relationship between gender and peace and security, but also the importance of public diplomacy programs. And then obviously you heard there these amazing stories from the people actually doing these programs in these various countries. I wonder if you could kind of step back for us, though, and given your position, and talk about the broader value of cultural diplomacy, its role in public diplomacy generally, and especially as it relates to women and girls, of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, frankly, I think cultural, and obviously I have a bias in this, but that's okay. I think cultural diplomacy is pretty much the heart of public diplomacy. I mean, obviously you've got the communicators, which are great guys and ladies, and it's important, especially in sort of this wired world. But if you really want to stimulate lasting change, then cultural diplomacy is the way you do that. Why? Cultural diplomacy focuses on long-term, sustainable, people-to-people exchanges that are not government to government, that certainly have a government element in it in the sense that we're trying to facilitate these exchanges and try to stimulate them, but there's a heavy private sector involvement, there's heavy non-governmental involvement, and frankly, no exchange is going to be effective unless it has a life beyond the exchange. So that, well, I mean, I can give you a bunch of examples, but from Zimbabwe, you're here on a U.S. on an ECA-funded cultural exchange focusing on empowering women through sports. You're here for what, 3 or 4 weeks? Then you're going to go back with your basketball playing women, and if you just forget what you learned or don't use what you learned, then it didn't have an impact. But I think what we've seen over the years that we've been doing this is that people take these ideas and then they implement them in their own societies. And to use your example, if we can show one woman and make her believe that one day she can be a star athlete or a star politician or a successful businesswoman, and that they actually become that, then we've succeeded. And that's why I say, if your goal is to effect change, then cultural diplomacy is the most effective way to do that. What is cultural diplomacy? I presume you all know that, but just in case you don't, the way I define cultural diplomacy is it is the sum total of, for the U.S. government, it's the sum total of programs that focus on the exchange of people and ideas that are not directed by the government. They may be funded by the government, they may be structured by the government, they may be sponsored by the government, but they're not directed by the government. We do not bring people to the United States and tell them what to think. We bring them to the United States, show them the United States, and let them make up their own minds. Similarly, we bring people from the United States overseas with the same idea, to expose them to the variety and diversity that is the United States, and again, to let them make up their own mind. Sometimes we get into a lot of trouble for it. There have been times in the history of cultural diplomacy when we are accused of promoting a certain agenda because maybe we're not necessarily politically correct. Well, we would say we were promoting a diversity of opinion, and that if you want to show the United States, you have to show that diversity and that tolerance of diversity of opinion. To bring the discussion around to women, which I think is the focus of this gathering, this panel, the way to think of it is we are using cultural diplomacy as, and I hate to say this because it sounds too utilitarian and too, I think, too manipulative, but hey, we're the government, so anyway. For us, cultural diplomacy is a tool to use to help empower women. We do cultural diplomacy because it's a good thing to do and culture is valuable and all that kind of stuff. But there also is a foreign policy dimension to this and a foreign policy justification. I mean, remember, these programs are funded by the taxpayer. We get our money from Congress. Congress wants to know, what are you doing for the American people? And we can't say, oh, we're just funding hip-hop exchanges, even though hip-hop exchanges are great. But what does that do for the American people? Well, I would come back to them in this case and say, Cultural diplomacy is helping empower women around the world, and that is in the fundamental interest of the United States. Why? Because, and Secretary Clinton has said it many times, if our goal is greater international stability, greater economic growth, greater prosperity, more evenly distributed, then you have to engage half of the world's population. You cannot ignore them. You cannot sit by while they are marginalized or not fully engaged in making their societies better. And there are a variety of ways to do that. You can, and one of the ways to do it, and one of, I think, our principal tools in doing that is cultural diplomacy. Offering women and girls throughout the world the opportunity to develop and to find ways to contribute positively to their societies in ways that they were not able to do before. So to me, this is a good example of the policy relevance of public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy in particular, and how one can argue that the government is, or cultural diplomacy is advancing national security by helping others. To many that might sound counterintuitive, but to me it makes a lot of sense. And you can understand it better by looking at some of the specific programs we're doing. I don't want to take up too much time and go over my thing, but I was going to go into a long list of programs that are designed in order to empower women in ways that reinforce both our national interest as well as, I think, a broader global agenda of economic, political, and social empowerment. You know, the first one that I'm really thrilled about is called the African Women's Entrepreneur Program. Has anybody heard of the African Women Entrepreneur Program? Yeah, people from ECA have heard. So this was an initiative developed in conjunction with the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which was itself legislation to help promote economic development, entrepreneurship, and growth in Africa. And obviously, you can't do that if, again, half the population isn't contributing to society, or isn't given an opportunity to contribute to society, and not given the tools to contribute to society. So the AWEP, the shorthand for it, brings to the United States for entrepreneurship training African women. And over the course of the last 6 years, I think that we've been doing this. We've trained hundreds of women from across the continent, many of whom have gone on to establish their own businesses, employ others, become generators of growth and economic activity in their communities. It's a huge step forward for us, and both good for the continent and good for the United States. Another program that we're really excited about is a program called Tech Women. Last year was the first year we did it. It focuses on women from the Middle East. We brought over 34 last year. We're bringing over another 38 this year. We've expanded to sub-Saharan Africa. And it focuses on mid-level women in the technology fields. They come over here. They are partnered with mentors in Silicon Valley and other high-tech companies throughout the United States. And they learn they learn two things. One is they're exposed to an example and a model of a woman in business who is successful. And they learn from her how she did it. Second of all, they learn, I would say, commercial, technical, corporate skills that they might not have known about before that they can go back and apply. It's so successful, we're now doing a Tech Girls program this year that will be a tech camp for girls 16 to 18 from Africa and the Middle East.
May I ask you a question? I don't mean to interrupt, but what you just said raises an important question, particularly tied to this issue of funding and pleasing Congress. You said it's been so successful that we're extending it to this tech group. How do you define and demonstrate success?
I'll give you an example. Two examples. One is the lady from Algeria went back to Algeria after this and started an Algerian Groupon. So, I can say to a member of Congress, we did this program, it cost us, let's say, I don't know, $1 million maybe? Which is, it sounds like a lot, but it's 2%, 1% of our budget. And, we now have in a country that is, how should I put it, not that free enterprise oriented, a great example of change and positive change. Another example would be in Saudi Arabia. A woman came back and started her own blog that didn't exist before. So now she's got this woman's blog going, and she hasn't been arrested, believe it or not. So that is what we mean by success. The other element of success, and that has allowed us to expand it, is, and I talked about this a little bit in my first comments, is we've gotten an incredible reception from the private sector. I mean, I'm talking about Google and Yahoo and Microsoft and Intel and all these big companies with big CEOs who are women who say, hey man, this is fabulous, we want a part of it. And so, we've obviously hit on something that works if the private sector is saying, we will support it, we will sponsor these people, we will pay for part of the expenses, so there's some cost sharing involved. And when you get that kind of response, both on the participant end as well as the partner end, then you have a success. I'll stop, but the last program I wanted to talk about, since we have Belia here, is the Empowering Women Through Sports initiative. I mean, this is how should I put it? I mean, this is just such a dynamic and exciting program because I guess, just speaking for myself, when you're playing a sport and you score a goal or you score a basket, you feel powerful. I mean, you've done something, you've achieved something. And we have focused this program on women and young girls this year, actually since last year. So right now we have a group of 24 basketball players from around the world, young basketball players and their coaches, who are here to learn not just basketball skills, but health skills, nutrition skills, training skills, discipline, education, sticking with it. The whole sort of life is sport metaphor, but sticking with it, discipline, teamwork, all that kind of stuff, empowerment, you can do it. And then they see women in the United States who have done it. And they're going to spend a week here and a week in Denver, and then they're going to be at the women's Final Four in Denver. As we speak, the American Olympic or World Cup soccer team is in Japan, conducting soccer clinics with young Japanese in the area of the tsunami and the earthquake. Again, bringing, I would say, hope, opportunity, and cementing U.S.-Japanese bilateral relations in ways that politicians can't do. I can never do that. I'm a government guy. They're not going to listen to me. But a woman soccer player who Japan defeated, by the way, is coming to Japan and extending the hand of friendship. That, frankly, speaks volumes more than any official could ever speak. And it's going to, I think, resonate with those communities, those local communities, in ways that no press statement ever could.
Perfect segue. There's so many great programs out there like you addressed, and I'm going to focus more on sports and how the companies get involved, the corporate side, public-private partnerships. As we all know, sports is an international language, so it's easy to relate to and to attract people to. And there's so many successful female role models as well. I think that's also contributing to the factor of why sport is so powerful, that around the world we can identify female role models. In fact, some smaller countries are putting more effort on their females because they think, female athletes, because they think they can become more medal winners. There's a higher chance of the females in those smaller countries to become medal winners. But, you know, just as the government supports these programs because it's not only a nice idea and friendly exchanges, but there's some tangible benefits we hope to receive, whether it's foreign relations or national security. I see how companies that support these programs, they are not only in it for the corporate social responsibility, but they're looking for a return on investment or a return on objective. For example, Nike sponsors a number of these social programs, whether it's government or other NGOs. And it's good for them to encourage people to play sports, get involved, because the more people play sports, the more goods they sell, right? So they also see it as if they're working with the government, they get some public relations, it's increasing their brand. And the more they elevate their brand associated with a good cause, they too are going to sell more goods. So whenever we're pitching, and I'm assuming many of you are here that are working for nonprofits or working for the government, looking for partners, I think we always have to approach it from how can this really be a partnership? And we don't just want your goods. We want you to be, we want to help your company grow and expand as well. And I think that's where, when you're talking about the entrepreneur and the tech ones, you can get those Microsofts and those because they want to sell more computers around the world. They want to, build that brand in developing countries. So I think we have to think about it always from what is that partner getting and not just what we're receiving on our end. And I have some slides that I'm just going to quickly go through just to, as I'm not sure how much we all know. Go ahead. This is just a definition of, sport for educational programs, health messages, conflict resolution, self-esteem, economic development. I think we're all pretty familiar with how sports can be used as a tool for social good. And it's not a new idea. I mean, actually, Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the Olympics, said that he wanted to revive the Olympic Games because he wanted to build up the French citizens. And officially, sport for development is the use of sport and the values of sport. And then there's so many global players, governments around the world. And in fact, I'm going to be quite frank that the U.S. is not really the biggest player in this market. There's so many other governments that are spending more money, have so many more programs out there. I had the opportunity to travel around the world to 56 different countries studying the Olympic movement. And I still have a letter that I sent back to, I was Sports America at the time, it was in the late 80s, that I said, I'm scared. I mean, we're not out there, and the rest of the countries are out there, Cuba and Russia and the rest of them. And I didn't see us Americans out there as much as I thought we could. So it's great to see Sports United back. But the IOC is involved, all the leagues, NBA, NFL. And then, just to make it clear, there's so many terms that use the same thing. We could say sport for development, sport for social good, sports for social change. So just kind of a background. And then here's some examples of the programs. And you can see, obviously, the NBA is supported by the NBA, but its corporate sponsors as well. And I'm just going to point out a few here. Right to Play, they have MasterCard is a major sponsor, and like I'll show you, a FIFA partner, Visa, they have a financial literacy program that goes with that. There's also Canon and a number of financial institutions like Royal Bank and Scotiabank are involved with these social programs as well. And then you have Nike is sponsoring almost all of these. Homeless World Cup, that's a major, Nike is a major sponsor of that. And solar companies are coming in. If there's any buildings, like FIFA has a Center for Hope that I'll be showing, and there is a solar company that came in and they wanted to showcase their technology, but then they also reduce the cost, the energy cost of keeping that center open throughout, till late hours, because oftentimes it's after dark that some troubles start happening in different places. So these are just a few examples that I wanted to share. And, understanding that UEFA, like the Homeless World Cup, again, that's the European Football Association. They primarily underwrite the Homeless World Cup, but they have a number of sponsors behind them, and so they use the money that they get from these sponsors to help fund that. Okay. And then, as the ambassador was discussing, Sports United has a number of programs, not just the Empowering Women Through Sport, but the pieces of empowering women through sport, such as the visitor program, the envoy, and the mentorship is something unique to the women's program. But these have been in existence in through the U.S. State Department for a while. Now I'm just going to demonstrate a few programs out there, such as the Visa Financial Football. Visa funds this, they developed it, and they also implement it around the world. They have one just for the NFL, and then they have one for FIFA, they have one for the Olympic Games, and so this is just one example. These are primarily examples that I took from World Cup. FIFA was one of the strongest corporate social responsibility partners out there. They also have a lot of money and a lot of influence, because soccer is the most, or football as they say it around the world, is the most influential sport and the most popular one. So it attracts a lot of attention. And so you could do a lot of programs. Some things that I want to point out here is that it wasn't just in South Africa that these corporate partners put on programs. They went all over Africa, and they went to cities that weren't hosting the World Cup within South Africa, because they wanted to make sure that the message was spread far and wide, but it was still close enough to the World Cup to do that. And here, Casserole, they took it upon themselves to organize camps during the holidays, and during the World Cup, all schools were shut down. So for parents that would normally have a place for their kids to go, there was nothing there. So Casserole decided to offer these programs in different cities across South Africa. And all of their programs had a component for discussion of HIV and AIDS. And something here local, there were a group of students that combined with other universities in the area to do this Team Up 2010. And I added this slide because I thought it was important for you to understand that college students are especially impactful in this area. And I've seen more and more programs that they can do things in the local community here in the United States, and then even take those students and go abroad. And so they're educating them not only here with the messages that are so important. DC has a high AIDS rate, as we know, and also transfer that knowledge overseas. Here is what I think is very impactful. It's Football for Hope. They had this plan 20 in 2010. They didn't quite make it. They have one. But this was, you can see it's right in the middle of a township, and this is in Cape Town. And they purposely put it here in this plot of land because there was an average of 8 rapes a week in this area. Because on one side was where all the housing was, and it was a kind of a blank area that people would cross to get to the bus transportation center. And there was no lights there. It was just a plain, say, 3 football fields worth of nothing. And so they were able to build something in that area, and I don't have a picture, but next to it, another national NGO built some other buildings around. So it became kind of this vibrant area. So and it was lit, and so when people were crossing now, the incidents are almost non-existent now because there's people there, there's lights there, there's activity. So, and you can see it's nothing fancy. I mean, I actually was expecting a little bit more, but it's pretty rudimentary. And then, but it fit in with their township. And then here is just some lessons that I brought 28 students down to the World Cup, and we actually went through and witnessed how they spoke to the students, what they did with the students, and you know, they incorporate the lessons into their football lessons. So this is just some examples. Biggest challenges that I found was that, you know, the funding continuity. As you said, you know, our government is all over the world doing great things, but they can only sustain that for so long. And the local community needs to buy in as well as corporate sponsors. And so I'm working with somebody right now in St. Kitts on the Aganar program, which is funded by the bank and Partners for America. But he knows that it's going to end in this is almost the last year of our funding, and he's really desperately looking for another partner, so we're working on sponsorship proposals and all. And you know, identifying local communities in Dominican Republic, I was there doing some football program, and USAID has a program with Major League Baseball down in Dominican Republic, but finding the partners that aren't going to misuse the funds and actually use the funds towards something good is another worry. So you have to do so much training and keeping those people, you train them and then they go someplace. You know, they don't stay with that organization, so you start all over again. These are just challenges that I'm sure you all are familiar with. And then the measuring and training tools. So if the people that are kind of there volunteering and helping aren't all that educated, or they don't stay consistently, again, you can put in this great measurement program, but then to work on these challenges, I think the more impactful our programs could be. So, thank you.
One of the things that Toomey said at lunch was that I asked her what the main benefit of the Global Girl Media Program was. She said, among other things, that it was just giving hope to some of these young girls, which is sort of like the story you told about, you know, seeing women bus drivers and women pilots, and you know, how do you measure and evaluate hope and seeing pilots and what that means to somebody? And it becomes a very real question when you're going up on the hill and you have someone trying to X out your budget. So, Mary, would you?
Does this work? Yeah. Thank you, Sean. Thanks very much. I'm going to talk about all these same things, but in a little bit of a different way, because in my career as a Foreign Service officer, I've had the pleasure of being able to take part in lots and lots of cultural exchanges and cultural programs, arts programs, more training types of programs, a lot of programs. And it is all true that cultural exchange is a long-term kind of benefit program. It's also true that we all want to, as you said, Sultana, we would really like to just take everybody and send them on an exchange program, and bring everybody from the United States too, for that matter, and make the exchange, but we can't, so we have to find other ways. So all of these things are true. But there's something, you know, I came back and I started here at GW University on this fellowship, which is great, and I started reading what others write about public diplomacy. And some of the kinds of things I'd been thinking about began to kind of crystallize a little better, because I kept thinking to myself, there's more, cultural exchange is more, sometimes it is more immediate than just long term. And even though we cannot involve as many individuals as we would like to, often it has a wider impact. So how is that, and why is that? And what can we do to make that happen more and better? So I started reading what other people, like really smart scholars, write, and it was great, because I found, for example, couple guys, Benno Signitzer and Timothy Coombs, and they were writing some time ago in the early 90s, and they were talking about public relations and public diplomacy and a lot of different things, but they were talking about cultural exchange, and they were talking about the traditional kind of cultural exchange where a country has a Ministry of Culture and it's all capital C culture, and they were saying there are still plenty of reasons for traditional foreign cultural activities, but in the view of many people cultural relations as a wider concept now include new priorities such as the promotion of human rights, the spread of democratic values, notions such as good governance, and the role of the media in civil society. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's more like, I feel that a lot of the work that I've been able to engage in touches on these things. And then I read, also there's more recently, a Norwegian woman, I think a woman, I'm not sure, person is writing, cultural exchange is not only art and culture, but also communicating a country's thinking and research and journalism and national debate. And in this perspective, the traditional areas of cultural exchange become part of a new type of international communication, and the growth of PD becomes a reaction to the close connection between cultural, press, information, and as a result of new social and economic and political realities. And I'm like, yes. So I'm not the only one, who sort of really feels like cultural exchange is not kind of over in its corner. It's really connected to everything else. And I think that having heard from everybody today, and especially some of the stories from the first panel, I think it's been, I hope you have seen the way I have seen and been reminded of how powerful these exchanges can be. And I want to just mention briefly that one of the first, State Department, or USIA before, the State Department's been doing cultural exchange and sports exchange for a long time, even when we didn't have big budgets. And when I was a very young officer in Algeria, we had an American track and field person come out. And I don't know what she thought Algeria was going to be like, but she was very nervous about it. And we spent a lot of time on the phone beforehand. I was telling her, and she came out, and like I say, I don't know what she expected, but it was not like that. She just was amazed. She loved it. She loved the people. She was so excited. And I'm sure she has spent the last 25 years, that's a long time ago, 24 years, talking to people about that, and she, I'm sure, became the expert on a lot of these issues in her, city in the United States. So it works both ways. So, so I've started to think, and I just wanted to mention, so I'm coming around to the clear understanding, or the clearer understanding, of how media and the multiplication of these kinds of connections through media can make such a difference. But it's not all a one-size-fits-all thing. And just talking about some of my own experiences and mentioning one or two others that I know about from other countries, I want to go through kind of almost like a little 4-point kind of chart almost that I feel like is beginning to crystallize in my own mind. First of all, the impact of cultural exchange on the actual participants is deep, 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 and there's no substitution for that. But if you want to reach more people, you can in a more shallow way, but in a way that maybe gets them thinking, maybe changes their ideas a little bit about something, maybe makes them question things they never used to question. So one way to do this is just get media coverage. Get media coverage. Well, okay, that's nice. But one of the things I have found, and this was certainly true in Morocco to an extent, is that people in the media, some of them are very progressive, and they like the idea of talking about what girls can do and what women can do, and they can be very good partners. And so we sent some space camp kids from Morocco as well as the ones from Libya, and the television completely focused on the girls. And we had 4 different news segments on the girls going on this program, and we liked it, but it wasn't necessarily our choice, but it was the choice of the media, and they were very good partners on this. And a second way, there's sort of a continuum here. A second way is a kind of interactive, informal media dialogue. And of course, I don't know ever how we did this before Facebook, but now with Facebook and similar social media, we can do this all the time. A group of soccer players might go from a country to the United States, and their teams from all over the original country, their teams are posting stuff on our Facebook page, and we're posting stuff on their Facebook page about exactly what's happening to them in the US, photos, and it's just so exciting, and that's a great way to be interactive. A third way is to create an entirely new media program on top of the cultural program. And so let me cue my short video here. Too short. Oh no. If it doesn't work, that's okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, this is just a little short advertising spot. In Malaysia, where the United States sponsors a high school exchange program, as the United States does in many countries. In Malaysia, one of the local television stations, youth-oriented program host, decided he wanted to do kind of a reality show talking about what these Malaysian students' lives were like in the United States. And I think it's now, I'm not an expert on this, but it's all over YouTube, and I think it's now in the 3rd year, and it's won television awards in Malaysia. And it's very young, very hip-hop kind of. And I, again, without knowing much about Malaysia, I'm guessing that it's one of the countries that has more private media now, you know, proliferation of media. It's not all just social media. There's more and more private media opportunities with television and radio, and with young audiences in countries with young populations. And so they were very anxious to do this show, and it's really a lot of fun. This clip is an advertisement for an upcoming season of Field Trip USA, is what they call it. And the 2 participants were young women participants, the 2 exchange students, so that's why I picked it, but we can't see them. Anyway, so, and when I was in Morocco, we did the same thing. We were doing a coaching with one of our Moroccan partners, training coaches, sports coaches. We'd done a lot of work with little kids, but we thought, let's do a twofer. Let's work with coaches, young coaches, give them skills to do community development in their own communities with sports. But then we can bring in the little kids as kind of subject matter, you know, for the training. So it all worked, and it was good. And when the local television sports station heard about it, and they said, so you're picking some to train, and then you're going to pick the best to train, and then you're going to pick the 2 very best ones and send them to be summer camp counselors in the U.S. Ooh, that sounds dramatic. That sounds like there's going to be tears and anger and joy. Can we do a reality TV show about that? And we're like, okay. It didn't turn out to be quite as much drama, but it was quite interesting. And it was, you know, it worked out great. So I think this is something else to think about. You do a whole media program on top of your program. But then another category, and I think this is one that's been around a long time but is still very relevant, and it goes back to that quote about kind of focusing on development issues and human rights and women's rights and so forth. And the 4th thing I want to mention is a cultural event that's really designed specifically to draw attention to an issue or a cause. I mean, I think, Tony, your work in Kinshasa was about that a lot. Global Girls Media has to do with that, at times. But there were some examples. I mean, I've seen a couple of examples. There are many examples where embassies overseas, not just ours, but many others, will have a concert on the occasion of World AIDS Day or the 16 days of against violence against women, or Earth Day, or some kind of bilateral joint occasion. And the thing is that some people are interested in the politics and the foreign policy or the economics of the specific thing that's going on. Hopefully more people are interested in the human rights kind of thing. But sort of everybody's interested in music. I had this thought one time. I was sitting in Uganda waiting for some journalist to arrive for an important VIP visit, and we were listening to the radio, and it was like the 37th time I'd heard a particular Celine Dion song out in rural Uganda on the local radio, and I thought to myself, I bet out of 6.8 billion at the time people in the world, I bet 98% of them have heard this song. I don't know how they felt about it, but it was hard to imagine nobody having heard this song at that point. And now that's popular music, but I mean, people like music, young people, and people like sports. And you can get somebody's instant attention to come and think about the deeper issues that you want to mark, you want to highlight, you want to put the arrows, by using culture. So I just wanted to run down those ideas because there's some ideas that I've been lucky enough to have the opportunity to think about here at GW.
No, that's a great, first of all, it's a great way of incorporating media into the discussion, but it's, I think, a nice sort of rubric as well. We've got about 10 minutes, actually a little less, but I'd like to just open the questions. Bruce, Gregory.
Question from Ambassador Early, I think. There's been a very useful and rich discussion this afternoon of connecting through culture. cultural diplomacy, sports diplomacy, arts diplomacy. The State Department's budget for these programs, I think it's fair to say, arguably is huge orders of magnitude more for educational exchanges than it is for the programs we've been discussing this afternoon. Is that a fair assumption? How are the decisions made for that investment ratio, and are you satisfied with it?
You know, I have to say I came on as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary about a year ago, and one of the things that I noticed right off the bat, and it's not new, is that, you know, and ECA as a bureau is very siloed, stovepiped. You got your culture folks and you got your academic exchange folks. And the academic exchange folks have a budget of about, oh, let's say 300 million, and the culture exchange folks have a budget of about 200 million. So it's not that, I mean, it's a difference, but not orders of magnitude different. But the point that the thing that bothered me was, I just thought it was there was, the silos and stovepipes were too great. And there are a lot of things that academic exchanges is doing that supports cultural exchanges, and a lot of things that cultural exchange is doing that supports academic exchange. And I'll give you an example. The YES program, the Youth Exchange and Study, Kennedy Lugar Youth Exchange and Study, brings high schoolers over for a year, mostly from Muslim countries, for a year here. That's a cultural, don't ask me why, it's a cultural thing, but it's an educational exchange program. Whereas in the academic side, they have a program called English Teaching Assistants, which is in the Fulbright line. But what do these English teaching assistants do? They're just fresh out of college, they're not English trained. They go overseas and they facilitate English language learning, but they're cultural envoys. They're not English teaching instructors. So again, you know, I just see these distinctions a little bit overblown. Not that they're not there, and not that they're not valid, but I think that cultural diplomacy would benefit from a breaking down of the barriers.